Abstract. The point of my paper is to establish a connection between Emily Bronte's famous novel Wuthering Heights, published in 1847, and the less well-known novel Glenarvon by Lady Caroline Lamb, published in 1816. Brontë was inspired by Byron's writing like many other early Victorian writers. Lamb knew Lord Byron in life and wrote Glenarvon as a personal takedown, as she was one of his most famously jilted lovers. Wuthering Heights and Glenarvon have plots and characters that mirror each other, which lead me to believe that Brontë may have in fact been inspired by Lamb's earlier novel to write her magnum opus, Wuthering Heights. The biographies behind Glenarvon are also concerned with bipolar disorder, as both Lamb and Byron are believed to have suffered from this disorder in life. Wuthering Heights' undeniable emotionality is partially due to the fact that both Cathy and Heathcliff are based on people who suffered from bipolar disorder. The connection between these two works is so that Heathcliff is a literal literary descendant of Lord Byron. On the surface, Lord Byron does not have an immediate connection to Emily Brontë, other than them both being 19th century members of the British literature canon. They certainly never met, as Brontë was born in 1818, while Byron was in exile from England. He died when she was still a child in 1824, but his legacy cast a wide shadow which allowed Victorian readers like Brontë to become familiar with Byron and his works. For this project, I'm not concerned with Byron the author, as I am with Byron the individual. Like many other critics, I believe that Byron himself served as inspiration for Wuthering Heights' anti-hero Heathcliff. How can that be when, as I said earlier, Brontë never met Byron, nor had a chance to get to know him personally? There is a missing text which provided Emily Brontë with the inspiration to base her anti-hero Heathcliff off of Lord Byron himself. This text is Glenarvon by Lady Caroline Lamb, which was published in 1816. A raging success in its day, Glenarvon is all but largely forgotten by the 21st century reading public. Wuthering Heights does not suffer the same fate, but rather continues to be one of the most popular novels written in the English language. This claim, then, that Glenarvon inspired Wuthering Heights may sound unusual to the 21st century reader, especially because Wuthering Heights has survived in the public eye this entire time, while Glenarvon has all but vanished. Glenarvon was meant to be a character assassination of Byron by Lamb, who was one of his most famously jilted lovers. The villain of the novel, Lord Ruthven, otherwise known as Glenarvon, was widely agreed to have been based on Lord Byron. There is a huge autobiographical element to this novel, despite its high dramatization. Other members of the Regency era ton are characterized in this novel, including both the author, Caroline, as Calantha, and her husband, William, as Lord Avondale. This is part of what made the novel so scandalous in its own time, because Regency readers felt that Lamb was giving away too much private information in writing her novel. Eckert 86. This novel came at a high price for its author, who was further ostracized for her unconventional and unusual behavior. While her reputation mildly recovered later in life as she became a respected novelist, Lamb is unfortunately remembered by history as one of the most famous crazy ex-girlfriends, due to her extreme stunt-pulling following her 1812 breakup with Lord Byron. Personal struggle with bipolar disorder is relevant to my assertion that Wuthering Heights is related to Glenarvon. The reasoning is I was able to recognize in both Brontë and Lamb's characters my own disorder. The reason I even read Glenarvon in the first place was because of my fascination with Lord Byron, whom I recognized easily as an untreated bipolar man from his biography, masterfully written by Edna O'Brien, Byron in Love. From reading Byron's biography, I knew Glenarvon was meant to be a takedown by one of his most famous jilted lovers, Caroline Lamb. I was curious to see her side of the story, as she is unfortunately written off as a crazy ex-girlfriend by quite a few biographers. In reading Glenarvon, I was hoping to get some sense of her viewpoint. Lamb's message was a little muddled between all the fantastic elements of Glenarvon and its wide range of characters. Like many Regency readers before me, I was hoping to get the tea about what happened between Lamb and Byron, as it was one of the biggest scandals in the Regency era. Even though parts of the story were drawn out and confusing, the novel does include a love triangle between the main heroine Calantha, her noble husband Lord Avondale, and her Byronic lover Lord Ruthven. To keep the character distinguishable from the novel, I will be referring to the character of Glenarvon by his title Lord Ruthven throughout this paper. Lord Ruthven's character is most certainly not flattering. He is a serial seducer who likes to play mind games with his victims. Calantha falls for his games, as do many of the female characters in the novel, much to my confusion, as Lord Ruthven seems to be a walking, talking red flag. Ruthven is meant to be a revealing portrait of Lord Byron, as Lamb was trying to show Byron's fickleness to her reading public by portraying him in such a way. Portraying Byron as a serial seducer does not seem off the mark, as his biography seems to agree that there is proof of him having many lovers. Aside from the biographies tying these stories together, I believe that bipolar disorder is also a component that glues the three layers of this paper together. In life, Lord Byron and Caroline Lamb were both believed to have suffered from bipolar disorder. Byron's disorder was argued and catalogued by bipolar scholar K. Redfield Jameson in a chapter of her book, Touched with Fire, Manic Depressive Illness, and the Artistic Temperament. Jameson uses historic evidence to diagnose Lord Byron with bipolar disorder. Symptoms consistent with mania, depression, and mixed states are evident in the descriptions of Byron given by his physicians, friends, and Byron himself. His mood fluctuations were extreme, ranging from suicidally melancholic to the irritable, volatile, violent, and expansive. Symptoms of depression include ennui, despair, lethargy, and sleeplessness. His erratic financial behavior was in a class by itself, and taken together with episodic promiscuity, violent rages, impetuousness, restlessness, risk-taking, poor judgment, and extreme irritability, it constitutes the classic presentation of manic behavior. Jameson 153. Byron's untreated bipolar disorder is made obvious when his symptoms are placed in context. Current and existing scholarship. From 2019 to 2024, there have been relatively few articles written about Glenarvon itself as a text. Most of the articles concerning Glenarvon briefly compare it to John Polidori's The Vampire, which is another famous attempt to defame Lord Byron's character. Polidori did not like Byron and had been his doctor during the summer of 1816, when Byron stayed with the Shelleys in Clare, Claremont, and Switzerland. There is speculation that Polidori may have been a jilted lover of Byron's like Caroline Lamb, which is why he wrote The Vampire in the first place. It is indeed possible, as it is widely known by Byron scholars, that Lord Byron was most likely a bisexual man. Polidori's text was published in 1819, 3 years after Glenarvon, and took some inspiration from Lamb's text, as he named his Byronic vampire Lord Ruthven. This was the same name Lamb used in her novel for her Lord Byron character. Most of the recent articles I could find about Glenarvon were really centered on Polidori's The Vampire or about Lamb's life. Lindsay Eckert's and B. Koch's recent writing on Lamb will support what I have to say, lending any credibility to Lamb's biography that I reference. Unsurprisingly, there has been so much more scholarship on Wuthering Heights during the same period, as Emily Bronte's novel is still one of the most widely read novels in the English language. Because Wuthering Heights is so popular, I wanted to write about its possible connection to the less popular text, Glenarvon, as there seems to be little scholarship on this connection. Lord Byron is still relevant 200 years after his 1824 death because he represents current social issues. Stouffer points out that many aspects of Byron's life speak to 21st century concerns. His sexuality was ambiguous. He was disabled with a deformed foot. He was sexually abused. He had disordered eating, and he was truly international in his outlook. Thorsby 1. Byron casts a complex picture, which is why people are still fascinated with him to this day. Historically, the LGBT and disabled communities were both ostracized by society, so it is interesting to see someone like Byron being so unapologetically themselves. Many modern readers can probably see a little of themselves in Byron, which is why he continues to have influences on today's culture. Byron's image persists, as does his literary protege Heathcliff. Joff's article, Reconsidering Heathcliff in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, deals with Heathcliff's racial ambiguity in Wuthering Heights. She frames other authors' arguments that Heathcliff is meant to be Irish, Black, or Roma, and added her own reasoning as to why she thinks Heathcliff is meant to be Jewish. For the purposes of relating Wuthering Heights to Glenarvon, it would be most striking if Heathcliff were meant to be Irish. Glenarvon is set in revolutionary Ireland during the 1790s, and its title character is an Irish lord who lost his claim to his dukedom and is seeking revenge on the society that turned him out. Heathcliff's extreme thirst for vengeance against society is shared by Lord Ruthven. Some critics believe that Heathcliff was written by Brontë to confront the stereotypes of the Irish. As Joff points out, visually, young Heathcliff mirrors Irish immigrant children that came to England in the 1840s to escape the potato famines. It's possible that Brontë made Heathcliff Irish to comment on the ongoing political strife in Ireland, which she would have been aware of. The Earnshaws and the Lintons are meant to represent England and English people. It's possible that Heathcliff's outsider status could be due to the fact that he is an Irish man attempting to make his place in English society. If this is true, then this detail could be another link established between Bronte's and Lamb's texts. Repeated themes and relationships between Glenarvon and Wuthering Heights. Glenarvon does have strikingly similar themes and characters to Wuthering Heights. The three main characters have equivalent characters in both novels. Cathy Earnshaw's possible predecessor is found in Calantha, who is based off of Caroline Lamb herself. Heathcliff has been recognized by many readers as being a Byronic hero, with probable inspiration being pulled directly from Lord Byron's life. As Brontë was a Byron fan, this is not hard to believe. Heathcliff's equivalent in Glenarvon is the title character, Lord Ruthven, who is based off of Lord Byron himself. The third character also mirrored between Glenarvon and Wuthering Heights is Edgar Linton. His original is Glenarvon's righteous Lord Avondale, a rival to Lord Ruthven and the man Calantha actually marries. Linton, like Avondale, deals with a man trying to rival him for his wife's affections. Arguably, in both cases, Cathy/Calantha seems to be in love with Heathcliff/Ruthven, despite being married to Edgar/Avondale. Other than the familiar love triangle in both novels, the order of the mirrored characters' deaths are also the same. First Cathy Calantha, then Edgar Avondale, and then, finally, Heathcliff Ruthven. This does not follow the orders of the biographical deaths of the real people whom these characters were based on. Byron died first in 1824, Caroline Lamb second in 1828, and finally her husband William in 1848. So, even though there was a connection to real people, the art that Lamb created did not entirely imitate life. What might be notable is that Lorraine Marcotte noted how unusual and out of place both Heathcliff and Cathy's deaths seem in Wuthering Heights. When one thinks of Wuthering Heights, one generally thinks of Catherine and Heathcliff, yet Catherine dies halfway through the novel. Marcotte 76. Marcotte argues that Cathy's and Heathcliff's deaths don't make sense in the context of the story. However, if Wuthering Heights was based off of Glenarvon, where the heroine dies halfway through the novel, and the hero outlasts her for most of the novel, then it makes sense as to why Cathy dies when she does. She needs to be mourned by both Edgar and Heathcliff, who survive her. One of the obvious reasons that this novel did not endure as the part of the Gothic literary canon is that Glenarvon suffers from having too many named minor characters with too many side plots. For Wuthering Heights, Emily Brontë cleaned up the excessive number of side characters and gave them each a purpose in the story. Isabella Linton, for example, serves to show how cruel Heathcliff can be, but also gives Heathcliff a son so his influence can continue on to the second generation of the story. Isabella's real-life equivalent doesn't match her character equivalent in Glenarvon. Her real-life counterpart is Annabella Milbanke Byron, Lord Byron's wife. But the character Isabella most resembles in Glenarvon is Alice, who dies after separating from Lord Ruthven. Alice dies the death of a fallen woman after leaving Ruthven with a young son, Clare. Now that I believe Ruthven's son's name is significant in this circumstance and points to the real identity of Alice as per Lamb's intentions. Annabella's equivalent in Glenarvon is not even named. She is the wealthy British lady that Ruthven intends to marry to re-legitimize himself. She is merely an incomplete plot point, as Ruthven never makes good on his threats to actually marry this unnamed lady. Alice is much more likely supposed to be Claire Clairmont, the woman Byron had a famous affair with in 1816 while he stayed with the Shelleys in Switzerland. Ruthven never marries Alice, and they travel to multiple countries together, which more closely mirrors Byron's relationship to Clairmont, more so than his relationship with his wife Annabella. He and Clairmont had a daughter, Allegra, whom Byron forcibly took away from Clairmont. This is just like when Ruthven forcibly takes Claire away from his mother Alice. While Clairmont did not die before Byron in life, Lamb made the stylistic choice to kill Alice in her novel. Alice follows the classic literary trope of the fallen woman whose reputation is only restored following her tragic death. Lamb likely would have sympathy for Clairmont, as both their reputations were ruined in part by Byron. This might be why she made Alice and Calantha friends in her novel, as a symbol to show her alliance with other women who were wronged by Byron, like Clairmont was. Conclusion: history matters. I see both Wuthering Heights and Glenarvon as works of bipolar literature, featuring fiery characters with raw emotions. As far as I'm concerned, Heathcliff is a direct literary descendant of Lord Byron. Too many details between Byron's biography, Glenarvon, and Wuthering Heights line up to be simply ignored. There is an undeniable connection between the famous romantic poet and these two Gothic novels.